I once heard that man's greatest fear is the fear of being alone. And I think it's obvious that the beast of loneliness has devoured more of us than killer clowns or zombies or slashers in hockey masks. The fear of wandering this life alone makes us desperate, and that desperation often causes us to search for companionship in all the wrong places. Tonight's story is about a man who has not been on a date in 30 years and is so lonely that he decides to attempt to find companionship in a bar. But not just any bar. This one is found in a dark alley in Nevermore Hollows. And those of you who often visit this creepy little town can guess that this isn't your normal singles bar. There are hard lessons learned in tonight's story. I am Lafayette Faust, and I invite you to sit back, turn on a light, and prepare yourself. Jack Meeks synced his phone to his new truck and pulled up a playlist that he'd put together just for this moment. He hadn't listened to music while driving in years, instead preferring to ride in preparation for life's daily battles. Because of the tremendous stress of his job and the agony of a broken marriage, he found that music flayed his nerves like a flensing knife. He had just turned 50 and was 11 months single after 30 years of marriage. He had finally divorced the soul-murdering witch who had been cheating on him for years, and 2 weeks after the divorce he had decided to quit racing the other rats by selling his small accounting firm to a larger company. He had also sold his house, making enough to take some time off before finding another line of work. As he considered his new freedom, he realized that he had spent his whole life making decisions that had taken him away from his true passion, which was writing. So, he found his muse in the heartache and had written a novel, which, to his surprise, had been bought by a major publishing house. He had taken part of his hefty advance and had bought the truck, replacing the 20-year-old Honda with fading paint and complaining transmission, and was just now driving off the lot into the beautiful autumn afternoon. The sun painted everything in golden highlights. The breeze whispered and the birds warbled, and he was suddenly gripped by nostalgia. His heart longed for younger days where his back didn't ache and his neck wasn't stiff, and there was more of his life ahead of him than behind. The desire to taste those carefree days compelled him to play a song from a band that had the biggest balls and the loudest guitars and used to make him feel invincible. That band was the Foo Fighters. The opening riff of All My Life kicked in, and he had the urge to give the finger to middle age, to tell it to kiss his ass because he was going to continue to live out the rest of his life with boldness no matter how little time was left. He was going to ride the bull even if it killed him. But he was tired. So tired that he almost stopped the song to ride in quiet solitude. He hated that this moment of youthful nostalgia was tainted by 30 years of being trapped in the rusty cage of the mundane. He took a deep breath. The crisp autumn air smelled like teen spirit and made him feel alive. "Screw that," he said, and pounded his foot down on the accelerator, causing the tires to rage against the machine. The truck shot forward and a smile spread across his face as he was pushed back into his seat. He roared down the street and turned left onto County Road 59 and headed out into the countryside. From the speakers, Dave Grohl growled, "All my life I've been searching for something." Jack was moved to reply to the truth of that statement. "Yes," he said. The overdriven guitar riffs surrounded him, and Dave said, "Nothing satisfies, but I'm getting closer to the prize at the end of the rope." Jack considered his newfound wealth and freedom. The stress of his past life clung to him like an unrelenting nightmare, but he could feel it fading. His present was full of success and potential. Hell, the publisher hadn't just bought this one novel, but had signed him to a 3-book deal. "I'm so close," he sang, adding to the lyric. He weaved through the country curves, surprised at how well the truck handled. The riff grew in its urgency, Dave getting louder, building the tension. Then Dave released it all as he began to scream, "Done, done, and I'm on to the next one. Done, done, and I'm on to the next one." "I'm done!" Jack yelled, now full on banging his head, the truck's engine growling along with Dave, the wind raging through the open windows and whipping his hair. Jack took the curves like a banshee, knowing that just ahead the county road intersected with the state road. He kept his pedal down until the very last minute and slid the last few yards to the shotgun-blasted stop sign just as Dave screamed the last, "Done, done, and I'm on to the next." He turned off the music and sat at the lonely intersection, heart racing, neck aching from the headbanging, thankful for the momentary return to youth. Then, as he considered what to do next, he realized that as awesome as his new life was, he was alone. He sat in silence for a while, then finally decided to consider the question he'd been putting off for nearly a year. Was he ready to date? The idea terrified him. "So am I ready for this?" he asked the empty seat. "I haven't been on a date in 30 years. I mean, I didn't really have game when I was a young man." He looked at his face in the rearview mirror. There were bags under his eyes and too many lines, most of them carved by disappointment. What makes me think I have any game now? He had taken a risk with writing, and that had paid off big time. He knew he had to do the same with dating. "I'll probably embarrass myself, but what the hell? I'm going to do it. I'm going to put myself out there." The problem was he had no clue where to begin his search for companionship. He didn't want a one-night stand, but he wasn't looking for marriage either. He didn't belong to any social groups and didn't have any friends who knew any single women. Dating sites worried him. He wasn't very photogenic, and he feared he'd get swiped in the negative direction and not be given a chance. He sure as hell wasn't going to put out there that he was newly rich. He wanted real companionship, not shallow gold diggers. He simply wanted to find someone to share life with. If it led to something more, all the better. The sun had just laid itself to rest beyond the horizon when he drove back into town. He decided to head to Main Street and grab a couple slices of pepperoni at Dante Inferno's pizzeria. He cut down Phantom Lane, which was 2 streets over from Main, wanting to park far enough away so that no one would ding his new truck, when he caught sight of a red glow coming from an alley. He slowed and took a look. Halfway down the alley, a red neon sign hung above the bright green door. The sign said, "The Rav3n Singles Bar." Nevermore Hollows was a small town with a Mayberry vibe. He was surprised it had such an establishment. Either way, this was not his scene, and lasting relationships were never formed in a bar, so he drove past. But suddenly, he realized he was just desperate enough to give it a try. He swung the truck around and parked across from the alley. He locked up and he found himself standing in front of the green door splattered in the crimson glow of the neon sign. He looked further down the alley and saw a black cat sitting beside a stained and oozing dumpster. It gave a low growl as if to tell him to get back in his truck and grab some pizza. "Screw that," he said to the cat. "Safe living nearly killed me." The cat shrugged as if to say, "I warned you," and with a flick of its tail, it turned and sauntered out of the alley. Jack grabbed the handle and stepped inside. He was surprised to see that the establishment was less a bar and more a rave. There were 30 or so people, all wearing costumes. In the pulsing, multicolored lights, he saw vampires and nuns and zombies and clowns and naughty nurses and priests, all swaying and grinding to the beat. He took in the scene, thinking if nothing else he might find inspiration for a story in this strange place. He saw an open stool at the dark end of the bar and made his way over. As he took his seat, he was able to see the bartender, and a bolt of electricity shot through him. She was stunning, with long black hair and a brilliant smile. Black leather pants and a vest clung to her curves. She poured a series of shots, glanced over at him, and smiled. His heart skipped a beat. She held up a finger to indicate she'd be over as soon as possible. His breath caught in his chest. Why am I acting this way? He thought. I don't even know this woman. Besides, why would she even give me the time of day? She pulled a couple of beers, handed them off to a nun and a librarian, both of them slutty, and walked toward him. He was overwhelmed with self-doubt, making him live the lyrics of an old song. She's just like an angel. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. She leaned toward him and smiled. He smelled jasmine and nearly got lost in her blue eyes. I'm Juliet, she said. What can I get you? I'll take a beer, he stammered. Which one? She asked. We have a variety. He was too aware of his age and off balance. He forced control of himself. He heard himself say, Your choice. She gave an appreciative smirk and nodded. Oh, I like a man who takes risks. She grabbed a glass and pulled him a beer. It was a dark beer, which he tended not to like, but was willing to try anything this woman put in front of him. This will change your life. He pulled some cash from his pocket. How much? She placed her hand over his, and he felt a surge of desire crest over him. He'd heard stories of people having instant chemistry, but he'd never felt it. Desire, bordering on lust, welled up inside him. She was so beautiful, and he was so much older. Then he felt guilty and chided himself. Oh, I'm a creep. It's on me, she said, and winked. He felt himself smile, ashamed because he knew it made the wrinkles on his eyes deepen. Thanks, he said, and watched her float off to pour another shot. His body buzzed with the excitement he had felt at her touch. He wanted to ask her out, but he was scared. He glanced at her, saw how the leather clung to her, how the vest exposed just enough to whet the imagination. What am I thinking? I can't ask this girl out. She's what, 15 years younger than me? She finished pouring the shot and looked over at him, noticing he was watching. He felt his face redden, thankful for the colored lights and loud music. She winked at him. He felt awkward, embarrassed, lonely, and pissed off at himself for his lack of confidence. He gave a lame smile and took a sip of the black beer. It was not what he had expected. Dark beers were usually bitter with a lingering aftertaste. This was smooth and bloomed hot on the way down. He shot a peek in her direction and saw that she was walking toward him with a slow, curvy wiggle, her eyes locked on his. He was embarrassed and wanted to look down at the beer, but he couldn't break eye contact. She put her elbows on the bar and leaned close, giving him an up-close view of her eyes, her smile, her curves. Do you like? He got the sense she was flirting with him, but surely that wasn't the case. A girl like her would never be interested in him. Maybe she was flirting for tips. He was mortified at his reply. It's tasty. He meant the beer, but knew she could see it as a lame come-on. Juliet threw her head back and laughed. He wanted to jump up and run out of the bar. I like you, she said. You're cute and sweet. Jack didn't know what to do, so he looked down at the beer. Hey, she said, seeing his discomfort. She touched his chin and raised his face. Don't be shy. I'm not playing you, sweetie. Drink up. I think you'll find that brew will give you the courage to do just what you want to do." Did she just encourage him to ask her out? Should he? Could he? A woman like this got hit on 100 times a night, and by guys half his age and better looking who were cocksure and had plenty of game. She surely shot them down, and yet they were confident enough to not let it crush them. So why couldn't he do the same? At least he could drive home not hating himself for being scared. Before he could say anything to break the awkward moment, she let go of his chin and sashayed off to the other end of the bar. Damn it. Why am I such a loser? Suddenly he heard Dave growl in his head. All my life I've been searching for something. He took a long drink of the dark beer. He felt its strange warmth. He took another, thinking about those lyrics. Nothing satisfies, but I'm getting close, closer to the prize at the end of the rope. The alcohol began to have a curious effect on him. The details of his surroundings were sharper, the colors more vivid, but there was a growing fuzziness in his brain. He could see things more clearly, but found it difficult to focus on them. He saw the naughty nurses and slutty librarians and creepy clowns and sexy vampires all writhing to the music in sensuous detail. Someone grabbed his hand. It was her. Juliet. She smiled, pulled him to the dance floor, and began to sway, every move an erotic gesture. He was too embarrassed to dance. She grabbed his hips. He began to sway with her. He matched her rhythm and felt a release like he'd never before experienced. His back stopped aching, and his neck was no longer stiff. He felt young again. Then the music changed, became less melodic and more discordant. The bass continued to thump, but it was not in time. The revelers began dancing and writhing and twerking out of rhythm. He saw that she had changed. She was still breathtaking, but she now had 2 tiny black horns protruding from her head. With his increased visual clarity, he could see they were not cheap Halloween props, but were in fact real. But the haze in his mind stopped him from being alarmed. He blinked, and her skin had turned a deep red. Her eyes were now black and ominous. His mind buzzed, blocking the fear of her transformation and emboldening him. He put his hands on her hips. She was hot to the touch, as if she were burning with fever. But he didn't care. He blinked again. She now had a long red tail. It snaked its own dance in rhythm with her gyrating body. She smiled, and he saw the fangs. They gleamed in the flashing red and blue and green lights. He felt her hunger, but he didn't care. He glanced at the other dancers. They were writhing to the beat. She caressed his chin and pulled his gaze back onto her. She leaned in to kiss him. He burned for her, but fear clawed through the haze. This was too fast, too unreal. He leaned back from her lips. He caught a flash of anger in her eyes, but she got control of it and flashed him a coquettish look. She offered him another sip of the dark beer. How did she get that? He'd left it at the bar. He felt the glass in his hands. It was warm like blood. He gave a dreamy smile and brought the glass to his lips. He felt the rim touch his lips, and he shot a glance toward the other dancers. His heart stopped when he saw that they were all dead. They gyrated and shuffled to the beat in their costumes, but their faces were rotting, cadaverous, skeletal. Some were missing limbs, others splattered with blood. His heart began pounding in his chest. He dropped the glass. She caught it, splashing some of the dark beer onto the floor. He stumbled back. She threw the liquid onto his face. He turned in time so that none of it got into his mouth or nose. Instead of sluicing down his face and onto the floor, The blood-warm liquid oozed toward his mouth. He wiped it away and turned to run, but he was woozy. He stumbled into a rotting corpse dressed as a nurse. It opened its mouth full of black teeth and tried to bite him. He pushed it away. A dead woman dressed in a skimpy princess costume clutched at his arm with death-bloated fingers. She was missing her lower jaw. She tried to stick her putrid black tongue in his mouth. It squirmed as if it were alive. He yanked free, but not before it wriggled against his chin. More of the dead girls closed around him, reaching for him, clawing at him, leaning in with decaying lips and grave-sick breath, all trying to kiss him, lick him, bite him, as if they were lovers. Juliet stood beyond the girls with her tiny black horns, crimson skin, and gleaming smile. She continued to sway and groove her hips, her arms held high as they wove serpentine designs in the air. His lust welled up, compelling him to give in and let these women have him. But on the heels of that thought was another. This was not his scene. This was not who he was. This place, these women, all led to death. With a surge of disgust and adrenaline, he began to punch and kick his way through the mob of the undead. He could see surprise in Juliet's black eyes, but instead of anger or disappointment, she flung her head back and gave a happy laugh. Jack pulled himself free of the death-mottled hands and slammed through the door and into the alley. The door fell shut behind him with a coffin lid thud. The cool air of the autumn night further cleared his mind. His hammering heart slowed, allowing him to catch his breath. He leaned against the door, shaking. His mind flooded with clarity, and he understood that Juliet was a demon that used sex and lust to prey upon unsuspecting men. Juliet was a succubus. He caught movement from the corner of his eye and turned to see the black cat from earlier standing a few feet away, one cat eye wide as if to say, "I told you so." "What the hell just happened?" Jack said aloud. The cat gave another one of its enigmatic shrugs and meowed. It turned and glanced over its shoulder as if waiting for him to follow. Jack realized that he could no longer hear music from inside the bar and that he was standing in the dark. He looked up, but the red neon sign was gone. Confused, he turned and looked at the door. Instead of being freshly painted, withered green flakes peeled away from rotten wood. His hands still trembling, he reached for the doorknob, intending to look inside, to try to make sense of it all. Did any of this really happen? The cat meowed, as if to caution him, but he needed to know. He turned the knob and pushed the door open. He was met with complete darkness. He snatched his phone, switched on the flashlight. The room had once been a bar, but was now in ruin. The dance floor was buckled, the massive oak bar was broken, and mold covered the walls. The cat gave another meow, coaxing him to follow. Jack pulled the door shut and followed the cat out of the alley. The cat locked eyes with him as if to say, "Don't ever do that again," and scampered off into the dark. Jack sat in his truck with the heat wide open, trying to stop his trembling, trying to make sense of what had happened. After a while, he put the truck in gear. He was too lonely and his mind too busy to go home, so he decided to stop at Dante Inferno's pizzeria. He slid into a booth and focused on the menu, trying to bring as much normalcy as possible back into his life in the light of the truth of the paranormal. Someone walked up and stood over him. Of all the people I expected to see here tonight, it wasn't you. He looked up and was surprised to see Lisa Corvin, an old classmate from high school. Lisa? Wow, I've not seen you in what, like 20 years? I thought you lived in Los Angeles. I did, but this town called me back. Look, the big city isn't all it's cracked up to be. So you're back for good? He asked. She smiled and shrugged. Yes. In fact, my roots are going to be deeper now. I've decided to open up a women's boutique in the empty space just down the street. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She motioned at her dirty jeans and t-shirt. I signed the lease this morning, and I have spent all day cleaning and putting up shelves. I decided to take a break and come here and celebrate. Well, that's awesome, he said. But you're going to celebrate with pizza? I'm a simple woman, she replied. Besides, I'd look pitiful celebrating at a fancier establishment. How so? Well, I got divorced a couple of years ago, and eating alone in a pizza joint is less pathetic than eating alone at the Ritz. She looked at his disheveled appearance. You look like you've had a rough night. Jack didn't know how to explain to her what he'd been through, so he simply said, Dating can be dangerous. Tell me about it, Lisa said. I stopped trying a few months back. She nervously brushed away a strand of hair that had escaped her ponytail. I thought you were married. Divorced last year, Jack said. Lisa stood quietly, expectantly. Mine was tough, she said. The cheating bastard. I lived for him, and he never supported me, made me feel empty. It's like that song from back in the day. You know, the one that talked about searching for something, but that nothing satisfies. And now that I'm chasing my dreams, I feel like I'm closer to the prize. Who was that? That was the Foo Fighters, right? The past year had shown Jack that dreams can come true. The past hour had shown him that life was precious. This moment showed him that life was unpredictable. All three of these truths pressed upon him the importance of boldness. What do you say we celebrate together? My treat. Lisa smiled. It was warm and charming in its honesty. Sure. That would be nice, she said as she slid into the booth across from him. Maybe when we're done here, I can show you my store.